And g'day, hi, I'm Sean Dooley here for BirdLife Australia's first ever webinar. This is Birding 101, Birding Tips for Beginners. We're just going to wait a little while. This is the first time that we've tried this technology, so we're going to wait a little while for people to come online. So I will tap dance for the first little while. And I just wanted to say in the room with me, I have Margaret and Sandy, who are off camera, but if you saw them, you would think I was in the room with Megan Gale and Jennifer Hawkins, because that's what being involved in birdwatching does. It makes you instantly more attractive to people because birdwatchers are naturally wonderful people. And if you're going to buy that line, then the rest of this webinar should be a breeze. Now, who is this that's talking to you here? My name is Sean Dooley. I work for BirdLife Australia. I'm the editor of the magazine, BirdLife Australia membership magazine, which is Australian Birdlife. And it's a quarterly magazine that comes out as part of your benefit of being a member of BirdLife Australia. And the reason that the BirdLife team, Margaret and Sandy, have got me up here to bang on about tips for birdwatchers is I have been suffering from what is known as birdie nerdy syndrome ever since I was 10 years old. This is a syndrome that is developed when I was at primary school. I had a teacher, primary school teacher, who was a bird watcher himself and a bird bander, and he had a pair of binoculars for every kid in the classroom. And in the middle of an English class, he would say, enough about verbs and adjectives and things like that. Let's go down and go bird watching. And luckily we had a wetland next to our school, which is now known as a seaford, Edith seaford wetlands, which is a wetland of international significance. And we would go down to the primary school fence and watch the birds. Now, I had a very great start to becoming involved in bird watching because I had an expert in the classroom, and I also had a fantastic local patch to go birding at Seaford Swamp. So I was experiencing right from the start the joys of seeing a whole lot of different birds with someone who could explain it to me. And the first tip that I'd like to give you today, and welcome to the viewers that we have, and before I give you that tip, I'd just like to say, those of you who are on Google Plus watching this and would like to ask any questions, what you need to do is go to the apps button on the right hand side of your screen and go to the Q&A tab and click on that, and that should enable you to ask questions. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you won't be able to ask questions directly, but hopefully some of the questions that are popping up will be answered as the Google Plus viewers see this. So welcome to this first Birding 101 webinar. What we hope to achieve today is, firstly, that we get it technically right, so that if anybody out there who's watching, if you could type a message to us saying that you can hear us, we'll get that message in about 30 seconds and we'll know that we're all set to go. And what we hope to give you today is a sense of an idea of, at the end of this, an idea of how you can get started as a bird watcher if you're wanting to get into bird watching, seeing birds in your backyard or down at the holiday house or your local park, and thought, yeah, you know, I'd like to be more involved and learn about how to identify these birds. Hopefully I'll give you a few tips along those lines, and also allow you to understand how you do the incredible work that BirdLife does in monitoring and conserving Australia's birds, because BirdLife Australia is a not-for-profit organisation and we're not exactly flush with funds, as these salubrious surroundings may indicate. But what we are rich in is our volunteers, and we have 12,000 members and supporters, and a lot of those people volunteer their time, and the time that they volunteer can be in a number of ways, but one of the most important things that we can get from our volunteers is their time when they're out bird watching to fill in surveys, systematic surveys that they send to us that we can then use in our various projects. One of the projects that we've just released the latest report on is this one, which is the State of Australia's Birds project, which is an ambitious Australia-wide project where we're taking the observations through systemic surveys, hundreds and thousands of professional ornithologists, but also just citizen scientists, average bird watchers, amateur bird watchers who are going out and doing a survey in their local patch, their local habitat. And it's collating all of those, and we're creating the Australian Bird Indexes, which are a way of us being able to keep track of the populations of Australia, which is a really fundamental thing. How do we know how to save birds, how to save wildlife if we don't know how they're tracking? And this is the sort of stuff that government will never be able to invest in. The amount of time and effort that goes into it, we just couldn't afford without volunteers getting out and doing their surveys. And so it's an invaluable asset that BirdLife has. But these are actually scientific surveys, so we do need a certain degree of rigour attached to these surveys so that the information that we gather is valuable. And so that's why we need to make sure that the people who are doing the surveys actually know enough about what they're doing to be able to accurately record what they're seeing out there, so that our researchers here can rely on that data to analyse the population trends of birds right around the country. And hence, that's what this is about. So we've got 19 people viewing, which is welcome, and we'll get stuck into it. We're going to ask questions. I'm going to talk for a little while, then I'll answer questions as we go and answer questions in the last half of this session. So if you have a question and you're on Google+, just type in your question and we should be able to see it. And then I will try and get to answering as many of your questions as possible. If you don't get your question answered in this session, then we will get back to you and answer those questions more fully at a later date. So thanks for joining us. And okay, bird watching. Now, just imagine you've seen a bird outside your window in the backyard and you think, you know, oh, that looks pretty interesting. I wonder what it is. You might go and get a field guide, and Australia is blessed with a number of field guides. This is just one I picked off the shelf here. There's another 3 or 4 fantastic national field guides, but they can be pretty daunting, because if you've seen, say, a black and white bird outside your kitchen window and you don't know what it is, you open up, there are over 800 species of bird that are registered in these field guides. And it can just be incredibly daunting, and it sort of makes people immediately think it's all too hard. But what we're going to explore today is how to make things a bit easier for yourself in identifying the birds that you see locally. And rather than just go in and try and see everything that you possibly can, you know, think about everything you can possibly see. What I find when you're starting off is you only actually need to, you don't need to know 860 species to be a bird watcher. You really only need to know 2 or 3, and you can really start cracking. And the way that we identify birds, the process, going back and thinking about what I did back in those days at primary school, was firstly, you know, I was a 10, 11-year-old kid, so you're like a sponge soaking up information. I presume that most of us aren't 10-year-old kids anymore, so we, you know, it gets a bit harder for our brains to process new information, new ways of learning. So I went back and thought about how it was that I learned about bird watching. And what it is that you get to learn a few birds that you know well, and then bird watching is all about looking for difference. So it comes down to a fundamental few things. So if you can pick a couple of species that you see every day and work out what they are, if you don't have an expert on hand to answer every time, which is always pretty useful, particularly when it comes to bird calls, then what you need to do is just learn those few species and start to learn what's different about the other birds that are around them. And that will start giving you clues. It's what we do every day in our life anyway. A lot of people think they can't do this, you know, beyond 1 or 2 species they know, like say kookaburras or ibis or something like that. But we do it every day in life. Like if you think about it, Australia's religion is football, be it NRL or AFL, and everybody, almost everybody, even those interested in football, can probably identify a number of those teams. Even if you're not into the footy. And we'll pick AFL for now because I'm based in Melbourne. That's what I know better. There are 18 teams across the country. They've all got different jerseys. They've all got different colours. Yet most people in the country would probably have a good idea of at least some of those. And the way that that starts is the first thing you do is you obviously you look for the colours involved in a football team or a bird. What are the predominant colours and what are the pattern they're in? And so that, therefore, you know, immediately once you get those basics, you can work out that if you know that red and white is a Sydney swan, then if you see another team out, someone in a football jumper and it's yellow and blue, instantly you've got a point of comparison. You know that it's not a Sydney swan, so it's got to be something else. And so then you can start expanding a field of knowledge. And that's the same with birds. You look at a bird and you try and get the first impressions you get is the colour of the bird. It really helps if you can get the what the predominant colours are and where they are. Because we have in Australia, for instance, you've seen that black and white bird. We have a number of black and white birds in Australia. So there are other things you need to work out other than the general colour. So you're looking at that black and white bird that's sitting on the fence outside the kitchen window. How do you go about it? Well, the next thing you look at is size. And then go back to the size. How big is it? And this is where it's good to have a few birds that you know. So say, for instance, you know, most people know what the size of a sparrow. Most people know the size of a seagull. Even with those two birds, you can start to categorise your birds more. So you've got a black and white bird that is more the size of a seagull than it is the size of a sparrow. So you're immediately narrowing down the field. And so if you've got the field guide, you can start looking at rather than having a wide range of options, you're narrowing down your options as to what that might be. But the other thing that you want to think about with birds is, apart from the colour and combinations of the colour and the size, is the location that you're seeing the birds. For instance, taking the footy analogy, often with a field guide, one of the best ways to identify things is if you're in Perth and the bird only occurs in Eastern Australia, then there's a good chance that it's not one of those birds in Eastern Australia. Although the fascinating thing about bird watching is birds have wings and they can turn up anywhere. But it's probably best to stick with what is expected to be in your area. And here's a really great tip that BirdLife Australia can provide is BirdLife Australia currently has a part of their website, a project called Bird Data, which feeds into the Atlas of Australian Birds. And in 2016, the Bird Data and Atlas projects are going into what is going to be called the Bird Conservation Portal. And BirdLife Australia are going to enhance what we already have and have a whole section for you to go to and look at bird identification and lodge your surveys, and there'll be an app developed which will allow you to log your surveys. But if you go to Bird Data right now, you're able to type in a list, type in your location, and that will give you a list of the birds that have been recorded in your area. So immediately you're narrowing down that field. So for instance, if you're seeing a football team and they're in Sydney, chances are one of those teams is going to be one of the Sydney teams. So if you learn those ones, you start to narrow the field. Also, not just location, but the time of year can really help in identifying a bird, because we have a lot of migrant birds that are here. For instance, the migratory shorebirds, a lot of them are only here in the summer months. Or a lot of our seabirds, particularly in the Southern Ocean, only come up to Australian waters during the winter months, or generally in the winter months. So knowing the time of year is really going to help. For instance, if you're looking at a football team and it's September, then you're probably able to say, well, it's not going to be the Melbourne Demons. So it's that knowing when a bird is meant to be around can really help you identify the bird. The other thing that you can look at once you've looked at the colour, the combinations of colour, the size, and the time of year and the location, is also what we call the bare parts of the bird. The bird might be a certain size, but it might have a really long bill or really long legs. And that can be really useful because it also gives you a sense of their behaviour. And this is the other key thing that really helps with bird identification, is how a bird is behaving. Often there'll be indications of what the bird is through for instance, the bill or the legs. If it has long legs, chances are it's a wading bird or a shorebird, that it's going to feed by going into water or stalking through long grass or something like that. So, and the shape of the bill will also give you an indication of what type of bird it is. If you're looking at a small bird and it has a fine down-curved bill, it may well be a honey eater, because they feed on native plants, particularly the native plants like grevilleas and the like, which have the long tubular sort of flowers. The birds with the longer bills will be birds like spinebills and other smaller honey eaters that feed in those flowers. So that's something that you can really use to your advantage to nut out your the behaviour of a bird is so important into working out what a bird is. So once you've worked out those elements of a bird, and if you've got a field guide, you can refer to it, or you can go online to either Bird Data or the Birds in Backyard website, which is run by BirdLife Australia. It's a fantastic resource because it has a whole lot of common birds that we see in our backyards around Australia. And so it's kind of ruling out a lot of the rarer birds. Because here's another tip. If you open up the field guide or go to the Birds in Backyard's website, you've got two options with a bird and you think one might be a rare bird. I can tell you it's human nature to always want to see the rare thing. And I think that the first tip you should learn as a budding bird watcher is, if you've got two options between a common bird and a rare bird, it's going to be the common bird. And you need to try and make sure that you see it, that you rule out any reason it couldn't be a common bird, because we all want to go and find the rare stuff, but really the reason things are rare is we don't see them very often. So it's really not very likely that if you start birding that you're seeing the rare stuff all the time. So always, if you think you've got something rare, it's really important to go back and look at the common birds it could be and rule them out. We might just keep having we might just have a look at some of the questions now, so that it's not just me banging on. And we've had a few questions coming through. Someone's, Melanie Barter has had a question. I mentioned Bird Data before. They've asked how they can become a contributor to Bird Data. Well, probably the easiest way to do that is if you go to the BirdLife website, which is birdlife.org.au, and on the web page, the front page there is a section down at the bottom of the web page which links you straight to Bird Data. And there's also, you can link in other ways to find out more about Bird Data and how you can become involved. So that's pretty simple answer. There, I think I've answered our first question. We've got a question from Stacey Maiden, who has said, are there any good birdwatching events I can participate in? Well, there's always stuff going on through the BirdLife network. There are a couple of ways you can get involved. As I said right at the start, one of the best ways to learn about birdwatching is to go out with a birdwatching expert. Now, not everyone may have had a teacher who was a birdwatching expert, but there are ways that you can connect with people who will be able to help answer some of your questions out in the field, which is obviously the best way to learn. And BirdLife provides a lot of those things. There are BirdLife branches right around the country. We're setting up our first branch up in Darwin soon. So pretty much every capital city is covered, or every state has BirdLife branches. And so if you go to the BirdLife website, you can find what's going on in your neck of the woods. There's lots of activities from the local branches, local bird walks. There are different outings and camps and other things, and that you can tag along with those or join your local BirdLife group. The other thing, if you're sort of feeling a bit daunted about, I don't want to hang out, I might not be a fully fledged bird nerd quite yet, it's a bit daunting, is there's a really good way coming up in October that you can get involved, and that's the Aussie Backyard Bird Count. You can find out about that from the BirdLife website, or from typing Aussie Backyard Bird Count, and that will take you to the Backyard Bird Count website. And this is something that we started last year, and we had over I think it was 9,000 people who joined the Backyard Bird Count and submitted their counts. And it's a really simple thing, especially if you've got a smartphone. You can download an app on the Aussie Backyard Bird Count app, and it's very self-explanatory. And it's really, what is most useful is it has a little field guide that you can use. to plug in the birds that you see in your backyard. And so it provides you with clues as to ask you what size the bird is, what shape the bird is, and also what colours the bird might be. And then it throws up a few options to give you a bit of a hand. And I believe that there's a screenshot now about showing what the Aussie backyard bird count looks like. And so that's a fantastic thing for a beginner bird watcher to actually start contributing a survey and get a handle on what it takes to survey. The backyard bird counts are great because they only take 20 minutes. The app does it all for you, really, apart from you just have to enter what you're seeing. And it also shows that you don't have to go to the ends of the earth to go bird watching. A lot of people have always asked me, oh, where do you go bird watching? And the fact is, Australia is really lucky. Most of us in our backyards have birds like, lorikeets, cockatoos, honeyeaters, birds that people overseas would kill to see. We have them just outside our back door. So people ask, where do you go bird watching? Well, you can go bird watching practically anywhere. I bird watch all the time. In fact, I may be bird watching now. It's kind of like pelvic floor exercises, really. You'd never know I was doing it, but always got the ear happening, listening for birds or watching it. And so the Aussie Backyard Bird Count is a great way to get involved and also get an idea of how surveys work, because it's a 20-minute survey, a limited time in a limited space. So it's not an onerous task, but it's fascinating what you can do. And we had over 27,000 surveys last year for the Aussie Backyard Bird Count. And it just, from right across the country, and we're going to be able to use that data in the future, particularly when we compare year upon year. We're going to start to be able to get a picture of what's happening with our bird populations, not out in the, beyond the borders of national parks, but right on our doorstep, right where we live, because that's, let's face it, where most of us see our birds. So this sort of stuff, the backyard bird count, the surveys that go into bird data that are then used for the State of Australia's birds reports. This is essential to get a snapshot of the birds that are, of what's happening to birds and bird populations right across the country. Okay, we've got another question from Greg Smith. G'day, Greg. Thanks for joining in. And that is it a good idea to get some binoculars? I've never found them easy to use. Can you suggest the right type for beginners? Well, binoculars, bird watching, you don't need binoculars to go birding, but they are an advantage, definitely an advantage. And if you get a good pair of binoculars, then looking for a good pair of binoculars at a very common bird is like seeing that bird for the first time. There are a number of high-end binoculars which the optics are incredibly good, and they're also very expensive. But there are a lot of more entry-level binoculars that your local optics shop, or look at the ads in Australian Birdlife that you can find out more about. And even places like at the Australian Geographic shop have some really cheap pair of binoculars that are fairly simple to use. Binoculars can be pretty daunting. A few tips is that at the end you look at is the small end. Otherwise, the birds, rather than coming to you, they look a lot further away. And the other tip, every pair of binoculars needs to be adjusted to your own eyesight. And often when you use binoculars, getting that actual binocular vision, and if the focusing wheel hasn't been done to your eyesight, it can kind of give you a bit of a trippy sort of bifocal experience. So one tip is, if you're just getting used to it, is just maybe even close one eye and just try and get used to looking through the binoculars with one eye and as a starting point. And the other thing using binoculars is it's much, especially in the bush, the birds are moving around, and it's much easier to see a bird if you look at the bird first, then put your binoculars up to it. If you're kind of wandering around the bush like this, you've got no sense of perspective of where you are. So it's much easier to look at the bird, locate it with your own eyes first, and then bring the binoculars up to your eyes to look at the bird. You're far more likely to actually get onto the bird. And here's a tip for those of you who are wearing binoculars. You could be Brad Pitt, George Clooney, and wearing a pair of binoculars around your neck is going to make you look like a bit of a dag. But that's kind of an occupational hazard. you'll notice the really serious bird nerds have their binoculars right up around here, which doesn't really work in the sartorial splendor stakes. But the reason they do that is because it limits the amount of time between seeing a bird and getting the binoculars up to their eyes. So they're out in the field, they see what they think's an orange-bellied parrot, they bang right onto it. Now that was a struggle for me as a teenage bird watcher. I sort of was into rock and roll and stuff like that, heavy metal music. So I tried to attempt to look cool, and I put my binoculars like a big low-slung flying bee guitar, sort of somewhere down below my knees. I can tell you, here's a great beginner's tip: don't put your binoculars down there, because when they're looking at the orange-bellied parrot, you're scrambling around below your knees trying to pick up your binoculars, and this is like 2 or 3 kilos of pretty serious hardware that's moving around in the whole nether region area. So it kind of could do some serious damage if you're doing that. The other thing with binoculars, Greg, is that people often think they have to go for the high-powered binoculars. That's actually not as a great a thing, because they don't focus as close, and also they're very heavy. So if you're in the bush all day, they can really weigh you down. These days with modern optics, like the smaller binoculars, even the 8x32s, 8 is the magnification, 32, I think, what is that? That's the angle that you're looking on. Even the 8x binoculars are fantastic for most birding, unless you're out looking at a seabird on the horizon. A pair of 8 binoculars are really good for you. Okay, and we're almost out of time in the last few minutes. We've got a question from Melanie again. Can you suggest a good way to learn calls? Now, this is a whole other level of learning birds. Like visually, we seem to be a lot more able to remember stuff visually, but I think I don't know if it's our culture or just humans in general, we're not as good at retaining bird calls, and we don't quite have the same language as we do. The best thing is to actually go out with people who know the calls and point out what they're hearing. But there are also apps that can't actually see the bird, so it is quite difficult. As yet, we don't have a Shazam for birds, which would be a great thing to have in this country. But it's a lot harder to learn the calls. So using resources like more experienced birders, if you can contact out in the bush, or go to the Birds in Backyards website, or one of those apps can be really useful. Okay, we're not seeing. I've lost the questions at the moment on the screen. So I think there was questions about where you can go birding that I saw somebody had there. Where's the best place to go birding? That was another one from Stacey. Watching anywhere, and in fact it's often better to get a handle on the local birds, the birds in your own backyard or down a local park, and it's really useful for your development as a bird watcher, but also for your for us here at BirdLife, getting data. If you can go to the same local area and record the birds, you're the person that's going to have the best knowledge of that site, and it gives a picture that the state of Australia's birds is hundreds of thousands of bird watchers going to repeat visits to the same sites and being able to compare month upon month, year upon year about what's happening with the birds. So it's a really excellent way to do it. But if you want to get a bit more adventurous, then again, checking out what the outings for the your local branch of BirdLife Australia is doing. And also a lot of the local branches have their own web pages. And for instance, I've just noticed the BirdLife Echuca District web page, which we're doing a 5 places to go special on them in the next issue of Australian Birdlife. On the Echuca BirdLife page, there is a number of great bird watching sites that they talk about on the page, so it's worth checking those out. And we're almost out of time, so the last question I've got here is, what is my most memorable birding moment? Oh, that's a tough question. That's a bit like when people ask, what's your favourite bird? There's just so many to choose from. I suppose I'm just off the top of my head, I'm going to pick the moment when I broke the Australian twitching record, which was a number of years ago now, since been broken by a completely insane birder called John Weigel, who's got an article coming up in the next Australian Birdlife, actually. There's a good plug. But no, I was attempting to break the Australian record for seeing the most number of birds in 1 year, and it was 633 species, and it was held by a British bird watcher. So I thought it was about time we got the bird watching ashes back. And I was on 633 species, and to see 634, I was at the Abrolhos Islands off Western Australia. Well, I was at Geraldton, and I couldn't get to the Abrolhos Islands in any other way, except I had to hire a light plane. And it was a two-seater plane, and the pilot took me out to the islands where a species of seabird called the lesser noddy was breeding. And the lesser noddy only breeds in 2 sites in the world, one in the Seychelles and the other in the Abrolhos Islands off Western Australia. So as we flew out over the Abrolhos, we went to one of the 2 breeding colonies in Australia, and I suddenly realised, here's this plane with a propeller. We can't exactly strafe the breeding grounds of this. So basically, if you were left hanging in suspense, we had to circle the island a number of times for me to see these lesser noddies. But we were either so high up that I couldn't really get a good view, or if we went down low, we were going around too quickly, so that the birds were flashing past. So in the end, I had to basically open the window of the plane, hang out with one hand on the strut of the wing as I looked down over as we circled the island until I got a decent view of the lesser noddy. So I suppose that is probably my experience. Okay, and we've now passed the half-hour mark, so we probably need time to wrap up. So it's probably time to wrap up. Thanks for joining us in what was a bit of an experiment as we grappled with the technology and hopefully imparted a bit of information. That's just the surface of what how you can get involved with BirdLife Australia and bird watching, because it's such a rewarding pastime. Birds are incredible creatures. They fill our songs with air, inspire us with their flight and colour, and they're often the most immediate way that we can connect with nature. And the more that people connect with nature, the more people care about nature, and the more we're likely to be able to do something to save it. So thanks for joining this. If you've got more questions, you can email them through, and we'll see you in the swamp. Okay, cheers.